Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into the ancient courts and shadowy criminal underworlds of India, where the most dangerous predators don't hide in forests. They hide in palaces. We're talking about the Rakshasa. Before we get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you? And if you're from India, have you heard of the Rakshasa? Do you have any stories about it? Maybe something a grandmother told you, or something you can't explain. I'd love to hear it. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. When you think of shape-shifting demons, you probably picture monsters lurking in caves or haunting abandoned temples. Savage beasts with fangs and claws, hiding in darkness, waiting to pounce on travelers who wander too close. Creatures that announce themselves through growls and screams and obvious supernatural horror. The Rakshasa is nothing like that. The Rakshasa doesn't hide in caves. It hides in mansions. It doesn't lurk in forests. It presides over courtrooms. It doesn't ambush travelers on dark roads. It hosts elaborate dinner parties where the wine flows freely and the conversation sparkles. The Rakshasa is a demon, yes. A shapeshifter with venomous claws and an insatiable appetite for human flesh. But it's also something far more dangerous than a simple monster. It's a social climber, and it's exceptionally good at its job. So good, in fact, that throughout Hindu mythology, Rakshasas didn't just infiltrate human society, they dominated it. They became kings, generals, high priests, merchant princes, and crime lords. They accumulated wealth, commanded armies, and shaped the fates of entire kingdoms. All while pretending to be human. All while feeding on the very people who trusted them. This wasn't random. Rakshasas didn't disguise themselves as nobles and crime lords by accident. They chose these roles deliberately, strategically, because power and wealth weren't just pleasures to them. They were necessities, tools, resources that made hunting easier, made survival simpler, and turned the mortal world into their personal feeding ground. So why did Rakshasas specifically target positions of wealth and authority? Why not disguise themselves as farmers or merchants or priests? Why go through the effort of maintaining elaborate facades when they could simply use their magic to overpower victims directly? Because the Rakshasa understood something most demons didn't. Power isn't just about strength. It's about access. And in human society, nothing grants access like money and authority. Let's start with the basics. What is a Rakshasa? In Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions, Rakshasas are a race of supernatural beings created either from Brahma's breath, his foot, or his corrupted essence, depending on which text you read. Ancient dating is more art than science. They're described as fiends, demons, or fallen spirits who were banished from the heavenly realms and forced to live on earth. Not as punishment, exactly. More like containment. The gods couldn't destroy them, so they relocated the problem. Physically, Rakshasas are shapeshifters. They can take any form they desire. Human, animal, monster, or combinations thereof. Their true forms usually feature animal heads, most commonly tigers, though historical accounts also describe apes, crocodiles, elephants, and occasionally insects. Their bodies are humanoid, muscular, and covered in fur or scales. They stand between 6 and 7 feet tall and weigh significantly more than humans of equivalent height. But the detail that matters most, the one physical trait they cannot hide no matter what form they take, is their hands. Rakshasa hands are backwards. The palms face outward when the arms hang naturally at the sides. The thumbs point outward. The fingers bend in reverse. It looks wrong. Deeply, instinctively wrong. Like someone took a normal hand, peeled it off, flipped it around, and reattached it incorrectly. And no matter how perfectly a Rakshasa mimics a human face, a human body, a human voice, the hands remain backwards. This is their tell, their one exploitable weakness in an otherwise flawless disguise. Which is precisely why Rakshasas who infiltrate human society spend enormous effort hiding their hands. They wear gloves. They keep their hands behind their backs. They gesture minimally. They develop elaborate social mannerisms that justify always having their hands occupied, holding wine glasses, scrolls, scepters, anything that obscures the palm's orientation. Because if someone notices the backwards hands, the game is over. The disguise collapses. And a Rakshasa whose cover is blown becomes significantly more dangerous, because now it has nothing left to lose. Beyond their physical forms, Rakshasas possess magical abilities that make infiltration almost absurdly easy. They can read minds, detecting surface thoughts and emotions. They can cast illusions so convincing that even the target believes what they're seeing. They can turn invisible, fly, and alter their size. They're immune to most magic, shrugging off spells below a certain power threshold, like water off scales. And they're immortal in the most frustrating sense. Kill a Rakshasa on Earth, and it simply reforms in the 9 hells over a period of months or years, then returns. Angrier, more informed about your capabilities, ready to continue exactly where it left off. Congratulations. You've just made an enemy with perfect memory, infinite patience, and the ability to look like anyone you trust. So with all these abilities, why bother with the charade? Why infiltrate society when you could just dominate it through raw power? The answer lies in understanding what Rakshasas actually want. And what they want isn't destruction or chaos for its own sake. It's pleasure, material comfort, sensory indulgence, the experience of luxury without the effort of earning it. Rakshasas are hedonists. They crave fine food, even though their actual diet consists of human flesh and rotting meat. They desire beautiful clothing, exquisite architecture, rare wines, and the softest beds. They want to be surrounded by art, music, and entertainment. They don't just tolerate wealth. They're obsessed with it. And throughout Hindu epics, Rakshasas are consistently described wearing the finest garments, dripping with jewelry, living in palaces that rival the gods' own dwellings. But here's the problem. Acquiring wealth through normal means takes time. Work, patience, skills, things that immortal shape-shifting demons generally lack, because they've never needed to develop them. A Rakshasa could theoretically start a business, earn money legitimately, and build wealth over decades. But why bother when you can simply become a wealthy person? That's the fundamental logic behind Rakshasa infiltration. Why build an empire when you can steal one? Why accumulate wealth when someone else has already done the work? So Rakshasas identify successful humans, merchants who control trade routes, nobles with inherited estates, crime lords with networks of loyal thugs, priests with access to temple treasuries. And then, methodically, they replace them. The replacement process isn't simple murder, it's study. A Rakshasa doesn't just kill a target and assume their face. It observes for weeks, sometimes months. It reads the target's thoughts, learning their memories, their mannerisms, their speech patterns. It identifies their closest relationships. Family members who might notice behavioral changes. Servants who know intimate details. Rivals who watch for weakness. Then, when the Rakshasa is confident it can maintain the deception indefinitely, it strikes, usually at night. Always alone, the target disappears. No body, no witnesses. Just a person who went to bed one evening and woke up the next morning slightly different. A little colder, a bit more calculating. Strangely fond of meat that's just a bit too rare. And the world continues as normal. Because from the outside, nothing has changed. Lord whoever still holds court. Merchant whoever still manages trade. Crime lord whoever still runs protection rackets. The difference is that now, behind the mask, something inhuman pulls the strings. This is why positions of power matter so much to Rakshasas. Nobles and crime lords share something critical in common. They have authority over others. They give orders that must be obeyed. And when you're a shape-shifting demon trying to maintain a secret identity while feeding on human flesh, having unquestioned authority makes everything significantly easier. Consider the logistics of being a Rakshasa, disguised as a poor farmer. You still need to eat. Your actual diet is human flesh. So you're going to have to hunt, kill, and consume people without anyone noticing. In a small village, that's nearly impossible. Everyone knows everyone. A missing person gets noticed immediately. And you, as a farmer, have no excuse to be traveling, no reason to have strange visitors, no way to explain why people keep vanishing near your property. Now consider being a Rakshasa disguised as a wealthy noble. You have servants who obey without question. You have estates with private wings where no one enters without permission. You have dungeons, if it's that kind of noble. You host large gatherings where visitors come and go constantly. You have legitimate reasons to travel, to meet strangers, to conduct business in remote locations. And most importantly, you have money, which means you can pay people to dispose of evidence, to keep secrets, to look the other way. The infrastructure of wealth enables predation. It's not that the Rakshasa needs to be rich to survive. It's that being rich makes survival effortless. The wealthy have privacy. They have mobility. They have deniability. All things that benefit a supernatural predator trying to feed undetected. Crime lords offer similar advantages, but with even fewer moral constraints. A Rakshasa disguised as a criminal kingpin can openly engage in violence, can disappear people without raising suspicion, can cultivate a reputation for brutality that actually masks its true nature. When a crime lord is known for making enemies vanish, no one questions too deeply where those enemies went. The assumption is trafficking, murder for hire, burial in remote locations, not literal consumption by a shape-shifting demon. And the beauty of infiltrating criminal organizations is that loyalty runs on fear and profit, not affection. A crime lord doesn't need to be liked, doesn't need to maintain warm personal relationships, can be distant, cold, unpredictable, and everyone simply assumes that's the nature of the business, which gives a Rakshasa enormous latitude in behavior. As long as the money keeps flowing and the threats remain credible, subordinates don't ask uncomfortable questions. This strategic thinking appears consistently throughout Hindu epics. Ravana, the most famous Rakshasa in mythology, wasn't hiding in a cave. He was ruling Lanka, a prosperous island kingdom. He commanded armies. He possessed flying chariots. His palace was described as having walls of gold, floors of crystal, gardens filled with supernatural trees that bore gemstones as fruit. He lived in such excessive luxury that even the gods were impressed. And Ravana used his wealth strategically. He funded his military campaigns. He bribed rivals. He corrupted officials in neighboring kingdoms. His wealth wasn't just for pleasure, though he clearly enjoyed it. It was a weapon, a tool that let him project power far beyond what his personal magic could achieve alone. When Rama finally laid siege to Lanka in the Ramayana, he wasn't fighting just one demon. He was fighting an entire kingdom that Ravana had built over centuries. Infrastructure, alliances, economic systems, all maintained through the wealth that Ravana had accumulated by being exactly the kind of ruler Rakshasas excel at: becoming powerful, ruthless, willing to use any means necessary to maintain control. The Mahabharata, Hinduism's other major epic, features multiple Rakshasas who follow similar patterns. Hidimba and his sister Hidimbi lived in forests, yes, but they weren't primitive. They ruled those forests. They had territories, subordinates, established hunting grounds. When Bhima, one of the Pandava heroes, encountered Hidimba, the fight wasn't just personal. It was political. Bhima was encroaching on Hidimba's domain, challenging his authority. And Hidimba responded the way any territorial lord would, with immediate violence. Even the good Rakshasas in Hindu mythology, the ones who allied with heroes or renounced evil, retained their appreciation for wealth and power. Ghadokasha, Bhima's half-Rakshasa son, fought for the Pandavas, but never pretended to be anything less than what he was. A warrior who valued strength, respected power, and understood that influence came from being feared as much as loved. This pattern repeats because it's not cultural accident. It's biology, or whatever passes for biology in immortal shape-shifting demons. Rakshasas are hardwired to crave dominance. They don't just want to survive, they want to thrive. They want the best of everything. The softest silks, the richest foods, the most beautiful surroundings. And in human society, those things require wealth. But there's another, darker reason why Rakshasas target the wealthy and powerful specifically. It's not just about access and resources. It's about corruption. Rakshasas, according to Hindu tradition, are fundamentally opposed to dharma, righteousness, cosmic order, the proper way things should be. They disrupt sacred rituals, desecrate holy sites, harass priests, and generally spread chaos wherever they go. Not because chaos is fun, though some of them clearly enjoy it, but because undermining order makes society weaker, more vulnerable, easier to exploit. And who better to corrupt than the people who maintain that order? Nobles who administer justice, priests who perform rituals, merchants who ensure trade flows smoothly. If a Rakshasa can replace these figures, it can rot society from the inside, make judgments that favor the guilty, perform rituals incorrectly so they fail, manipulate trade to create shortages and suffering. This isn't speculation. It's explicitly stated in multiple Hindu texts. Rakshasas are described as beings whose very presence disrupts dharma, whose existence is antithetical to proper cosmic function. Killing a Rakshasa isn't just self-defense. It's a spiritual duty, a restoration of balance. Because every day a Rakshasa lives disguised as a human authority figure is another day that society decays. From the Rakshasa's perspective, though, this is just efficiency. Why work against society's structures when you can become those structures? Why fight laws when you can write them? Why avoid authorities when you can be the authority? The backwards hands become relevant again here, because maintaining a high-profile disguise while hiding your one identifying feature requires constant vigilance. And vigilance creates stress. Stress creates mistakes. And mistakes, for a Rakshasa, are potentially fatal. So Rakshasas develop elaborate strategies to manage the hand problem. Some wear gloves constantly, claiming sensitive skin or aristocratic affectation. Others develop reputations for eccentric gestures, always holding objects, always keeping hands in specific positions. A few learn to shift their hand bones slightly, enough to make the backwards orientation less obvious, though this is apparently painful and difficult to maintain. The wealthier the Rakshasa's persona, the easier this becomes. Eccentric rich people can get away with anything. Want to wear gloves indoors? Sure, quirky noble habit. Want to gesture with closed fists? Probably an old war injury. Want to keep your hands clasped behind your back constantly? Must be proper courtly etiquette. Wealth provides cover for behavioral oddities that would raise immediate suspicion in someone poor. Crime lords have it even easier. Violence-prone reputation means scarred, hidden hands make perfect sense. Gloves prevent leaving fingerprints, or they're covering burn marks from torture, or they're just part of the intimidating aesthetic. No one questions why the crime boss never shakes hands properly. They assume it's dominance display, power move, psychological warfare, when in reality, it's just a demon trying not to reveal that its palms face the wrong direction. This creates an interesting dynamic. Rakshasas pursuing wealth and power aren't just following instinct. They're making calculated strategic decisions about which social roles offer the best combination of resources, authority, and disguise maintenance feasibility. And throughout history, across different kingdoms and eras, they consistently choose the same roles. Because those roles work. The pattern is so consistent that Hindu texts include warnings specifically about trusting wealthy strangers, about watching for behavioral oddities in nobles, about being suspicious when powerful people avoid physical contact. These aren't generic trust no one paranoia. They're practical survival advice in a world where shape-shifting predators specifically target positions of authority. And the terrifying part? Even when humans suspected a Rakshasa's presence, stopping it was nearly impossible. Because by the time someone noticed the backwards hands or caught the demon feeding, the Rakshasa had already accumulated massive resources. Guards, allies, wealth that could hire assassins, legal authority to imprison accusers. The very power that made the disguise attractive also made it self-protecting. This is why heroes in Hindu epics don't just fight Rakshasas. They fight entire systems the Rakshasas have built. Rama's war against Ravana lasted years and required assembling an army of Vanaras, monkey-like humanoids, because Ravana's wealth had made him too powerful to challenge directly. Bhima's battles against forest-dwelling Rakshasas always involved dismantling their territorial control, not just killing the individual demon. Because killing the Rakshasa doesn't solve the problem if it already built an empire. The empire continues. The corruption remains. And eventually, the Rakshasa reforms in hell and comes back to reclaim what it built. Which brings us to the immortality issue. Rakshasas reform after death. They retain their memories. They know who killed them. And they hold grudges. This means that a Rakshasa infiltrating society isn't playing a short game. It's playing the longest possible game. It can wait decades for the perfect opportunity, can spend years establishing a single identity, can lose everything, reform, and start over with lessons learned. From this perspective, disguising as a wealthy noble or crime lord isn't just about immediate benefit. It's about building sustainable infrastructure, creating power bases that can be reclaimed after death, establishing reputations that make re-infiltration easier. A Rakshasa, who spent a century as a respected merchant, got killed and reformed, wouldn't start from scratch. It would return, assume a new face, and present itself as the deceased merchant's distant relative, heir to the business, complete with forged documents and planted memories in witnesses' minds. And because it actually ran the business for a century, it knows everything. Every trade route, every contact, every secret. The transition is seamless. This is nightmare fuel for anyone trying to maintain stable society. Because it means you're not just fighting individual demons. You're fighting institutional knowledge passed through immortal beings who learn from every defeat and return stronger. And the Rakshasas know this. They leverage it ruthlessly. A young Rakshasa's first move after creation is often seeking out older Rakshasas' established identities and learning from them. Mentorship programs for supernatural infiltration. Which ancient noble families are actually fronts for demons? Which crime syndicates have been Rakshasa-controlled for generations? Which temples have corrupted priests who are secretly feeding on congregants? This information gets passed down, preserved, improved upon, creating lineages of deception that span centuries. The wealthy noble whose family has served the kingdom loyally for 10 generations? Maybe. Or maybe the first generation was human, and generations 2 through 10 have all been the same Rakshasa, pretending to be its own descendants. No way to know until you check the hands. And by the time you're close enough to check, you're probably already in danger. How Rakshasas maintain these long-term deceptions reveals the true sophistication of their strategy. The daily mechanics of living as someone else. The psychological strain of never dropping the mask. The moments where the disguise nearly fails. And the question that haunts everyone who learns this creature exists. If they're this good at hiding, how many are out there right now? How many nobles, crime lords, and wealthy merchants are actually demons wearing human skin? And if you noticed the backwards hands, would you even have time to run? The specifics of how this actually works reveal just how sophisticated these creatures are. Because understanding the theory behind Rakshasa infiltration is one thing. Understanding the practice, the day-to-day mechanics of being a demon pretending to be human nobility, is another entirely. Start with target selection. A Rakshasa doesn't just pick a random wealthy person and replace them. That's amateur work. That gets you caught in weeks. Professional infiltration requires research. And Rakshasas, with their ability to read minds and turn invisible, are exceptional researchers. The ideal target for Rakshasa replacement has several characteristics. First, they're isolated. Not friendless necessarily, but surrounded by transactional relationships rather than genuine emotional bonds. Nobles who inherited their position rather than earning it. Merchants who built their fortune through ruthless competition that burned every friendship along the way. Crime lords who murdered their way to the top and trust absolutely no one. These people have acquaintances, business partners, subordinates, but they don't have friends. Don't have people who know them intimately, who would notice subtle personality changes, who would question why Lord whoever suddenly prefers his meat nearly raw or has developed an aversion to sacred sites. Second characteristic is physical similarity. While Rakshasas can technically shapeshift into any form, maintaining a shape that's drastically different from their natural proportions requires constant magical effort. It's exhausting. Like holding your breath underwater. You can do it, but not forever. So Rakshasas prefer targets who are roughly their size. 6 to 7 feet tall. Muscular build. Features that can accommodate an animal-like bone structure without looking obviously wrong. This automatically excludes most women, children, and smaller men from consideration, which is why Rakshasa infiltration in Hindu epics almost always involves large, imposing male figures. Not because Rakshasas are sexist, because physics, or magical equivalent thereof, makes matching certain body types significantly easier. Third characteristic is recent trauma, or major life change. Someone whose personality might legitimately shift due to circumstances. A noble who just lost a close family member. A merchant recovering from a near-death experience. A crime lord who survived an assassination attempt. These people have built-in excuses for behavioral changes, for being more withdrawn, for developing new habits, new preferences, new ways of interacting with the world. When someone's undergone significant trauma, their social circle expects them to be different, forgives inconsistencies, attributes oddities to grief or stress or recovery, which gives a Rakshasa enormous latitude during the critical early weeks when the disguise is most vulnerable. Once a target is selected, observation begins. The Rakshasa watches from invisibility, follows the target through their daily routine, listens to conversations, reads surface thoughts to understand relationships, fears, desires. This phase can last months. The Rakshasa is learning not just what the target does, but why, what motivates them, what excuses they use, what lies they tell themselves to justify their actions. Because here's the thing about impersonation. It's not about looking right. Any shapeshifter can copy a face. It's about thinking right. About making the same decisions the original would make, for the same reasons, in the same way. And that requires understanding someone at a level most humans never achieve even with their closest loved ones. Rakshasas achieve it through literal mind reading, which is, frankly, horrifyingly effective. During this observation phase, the Rakshasa also identifies potential problems. Who's too observant? Which servant pays too much attention? Which family member asks uncomfortable questions? These people get marked for early removal. Not always killed, sometimes just discredited, framed for theft, convinced to leave service, married off to distant provinces. By the time the Rakshasa replaces its target, the social landscape has been carefully pruned. The too observant servant was fired last month for stealing. The suspicious family member was sent on an extended diplomatic mission. The perceptive business partner died in a tragic but entirely explainable accident. All coincidences, naturally. All perfectly timed to create maximum isolation around the target. Then comes the actual replacement. This is always violent. Has to be. The target needs to disappear completely. No body. No evidence. Nothing that could resurface later to expose the deception. So the Rakshasa waits until the target is alone, vulnerable, and unlikely to be interrupted. Then strikes. The kill is fast. Rakshasas have venomous claws and supernatural strength. Most targets die within seconds. Then comes the consumption. Because Rakshasas are man-eaters, and letting a fresh kill go to waste would be wasteful. The entire body gets consumed. Bones, clothes, jewelry, everything. Nothing remains. By morning, Lord Whoever simply woke up from a long night of contemplating his recent losses. He's changed, yes, quieter, more withdrawn. But that's understandable, given everything he's been through. And just like that, the Rakshasa has a new life. The first few weeks are critical. This is when mistakes happen, when the disguise cracks. The Rakshasa knows the target's memories, but experiencing them secondhand through mind reading isn't the same as living them. There are gaps, inconsistencies. A servant mentions an inside joke the Rakshasa doesn't understand. A business contact references a deal that wasn't in the target's surface thoughts. A family member asks about a childhood memory the Rakshasa can't access. Professional Rakshasas handle this through misdirection. They blame grief for memory lapses. They cite stress for personality changes. They develop reputations for being forgetful or eccentric or deliberately mysterious. Whatever narrative makes the inconsistencies seem intentional rather than suspicious. Less professional Rakshasas just kill anyone who asks too many questions, which works short-term but creates its own problems. Because eventually, you run out of servants, run out of business partners, and people start noticing that Lord Whoever's household has an unusually high mortality rate. The successful infiltrators, the ones who maintain their disguises for decades or centuries, are the ones who learn to genuinely become their targets. They don't just impersonate. They absorb. They study the target's mannerisms until performing them feels natural. They adopt the target's preferences until they genuinely enjoy the same things. They think through the target's logic until making their decisions feels instinctive. At which point a philosophical question emerges. If a Rakshasa perfectly impersonates someone for a century, living their life, making their decisions, maintaining their relationships, is it still impersonation? Or has the Rakshasa, in some meaningful sense, become that person? Hindu philosophy wrestles with this occasionally. Because some texts describe Rakshasas, who infiltrated so completely, maintained their disguises so perfectly, that they forgot they were Rakshasas, lived entire human lifetimes believing themselves mortal, only to remember their true nature at death and return, confused and traumatized, to the demon realms. Whether that's metaphor for the danger of deception or literal warning about identity dissolution is unclear. But it suggests that even Rakshasas, with all their power and immortality, aren't immune to becoming what they pretend to be. Which brings us to the logistics of feeding. Because no matter how perfect the disguise, a Rakshasa still needs to eat. And its diet consists primarily of human flesh and spoiled meat. You can't just order that from the kitchen staff without raising questions. Wealthy nobles and crime lords solve this problem differently. Nobles have dungeons, private estates with areas that servants don't enter, underground chambers where screens don't carry. A noble can quietly kidnap travelers, vagrants, criminals sentenced to imprisonment, people whose disappearances won't be investigated thoroughly. And as long as the consumption happens in private, as long as the bones are disposed of properly, no one knows. Some Rakshasa nobles develop reputations for harsh justice to cover their feeding. They sentence criminals to dungeons from which no one emerges. Everyone assumes execution or life imprisonment. The reality is consumption. The criminal becomes dinner. The justice system becomes a feeding mechanism. And society applauds the strict enforcement of law. Crime lords have it easier in some ways. They can openly disappear people, rival gang members, informants, anyone who crosses the organization. No one expects these people to resurface. Their absence is the point. And if the crime lord happens to be personally handling the disposal, well, that's just showing dedication to the work. But there's a limit to how many people you can disappear before someone notices the pattern. Before rival nobles or competing crime syndicates realize something's wrong. So successful Rakshasas diversify. They don't feed exclusively on local victims. They travel. Attend gatherings in other cities where strangers won't be missed. Maintain hunting grounds in remote areas where transients and travelers provide steady supply without creating obvious local depletion. Some establish trade routes or courier services that provide legitimate reasons for people to visit their estates and never arrive at their destinations. Others fund orphanages or poorhouses where occasional losses can be attributed to disease or runaways. The wealthy have infrastructure, and infrastructure, properly managed, can hide enormous amounts of predation. There's also the matter of taste. Rakshasas can eat normal food. They don't enjoy it, particularly, but they can consume it without harm. So at public banquets, at diplomatic dinners, at any gathering where eating is social rather than sustenance, Rakshasas perform. They eat what humans eat. They complement the cooking. They participate in food culture adequately enough to avoid suspicion. But their actual nutrition comes from private feeding, usually at night, usually alone. And the wealthier the Rakshasas disguise, the easier it is to ensure that privacy. Servants who enter unannounced get dismissed. Family members who intrude get relocated. Anyone who might witness the feeding gets removed from the equation. This creates a paradox. The more successful a Rakshasa becomes at maintaining its disguise, the more isolated it becomes. Because true intimacy means risk. Means someone getting close enough to notice the details that don't quite match. The hands that bend wrong. The preference for meat so rare it's barely cooked. The way mirrors sometimes reflect something that doesn't quite look human. So Rakshasa nobles and crime lords end up living in gilded cages of their own making, surrounded by luxury, but unable to genuinely connect with anyone. Unable to drop the mask, even for a moment. Unable to trust that any relationship is anything other than strategic. Which raises an interesting question about motivation. If maintaining the disguise is this difficult, this isolating, this exhausting, why continue? Why not just live openly as a Rakshasa and dominate through raw power? The answer, repeatedly, comes back to material comfort and social stability. A Rakshasa living openly as a demon would be constantly hunted, would have to fight for every meal, would lose access to all the luxuries that make existence pleasant. The soft beds, the fine wines, the architecture, the art, the music, all the things that wealth provides. By maintaining the disguise, by staying hidden, the Rakshasa buys peace. Not moral peace, but practical peace. The peace of knowing tonight's dinner is handled. The peace of sleeping in a mansion rather than a cave. The peace of being surrounded by beauty rather than fleeing through wilderness. And for creatures that value sensory pleasure above almost everything else, that peace is worth the effort. Hindu texts note this repeatedly. Rakshasas in their true forms, living as open demons, are described as constantly ravenous, constantly struggling, constantly fighting with each other over resources. But Rakshasas disguised as wealthy humans are described as content, well-fed, almost lazy in their confidence. The disguise isn't just protection, it's quality of life improvement. Regional variations exist in how different Rakshasa traditions approach infiltration. In some areas, Rakshasas prefer royal courts. They target princes, generals, advisors. Positions with political power but not necessarily supreme authority, because being the king means everyone watches you constantly. But being the king's most trusted advisor, that's the sweet spot. Power without scrutiny, influence without spotlight. In other regions, Rakshasas avoid politics entirely. They focus on economic control, become merchant princes who manipulate trade, who create artificial scarcities, who profit from chaos while appearing to help solve it. These Rakshasas rarely see heroes, because heroes chase politically powerful demons. They don't audit shipping manifests. A few Rakshasa traditions target religious authority, become high priests or temple administrators. This is risky because genuine holy power can detect demons. But the rewards are substantial. Temples have wealth. They have community trust. And a corrupted priest can undermine society's spiritual foundation in ways a corrupted noble never could. These infiltrator priests sabotage rituals, give bad spiritual advice, collect donations that vanish into personal coffers. And when practitioners notice their faith isn't providing expected results, when prayers seem to go unanswered and rituals fail, they blame themselves, question their devotion, never suspecting that the problem isn't their faith, but the demon wearing priestly robes. The economic impact of Rakshasa infiltration varies depending on how many are operating in a given area and how efficiently they're managed. A single Rakshasa replacing a minor noble has minimal effect. That noble's estate continues functioning. Taxes get paid. Trade continues. From a macro perspective, nothing changes. But multiple Rakshasas, coordinating their efforts, working together across a kingdom or region, that can destabilize entire economies. When trade routes get mysteriously disrupted, when rival merchant houses keep experiencing tragic accidents, when crime syndicates that should be competing suddenly seem to be working in concert. These are signs that Rakshasa infiltration has reached critical mass. Hindu epics describe kingdoms that fell not to invasion or plague, but to internal rot, to corruption so deep, so pervasive, that the entire system collapsed. And when heroes investigate these collapses, they consistently find Rakshasas. Not just one. Networks of them, coordinated, patient, working across decades to hollow out society from within. Because that's the ultimate goal for organized Rakshasa infiltration. Not just individual comfort, but systemic control. Turn an entire kingdom into a feeding ground, where humans exist to serve demon needs, where wealth flows to Rakshasa-controlled entities, where anyone who questions the system gets quietly disappeared. And the terrifying part? From the outside, these kingdoms look prosperous. The nobles are wealthy. The merchants are successful. Crime is controlled by established syndicates. Everything appears to be working, right up until the moment someone checks the hands of the people in charge and realizes none of them are human. At which point, it's usually too late to fix the problem without tearing down the entire structure and starting over, which is exactly what happens in Hindu epics. Heroes don't reform corrupted kingdoms. They destroy them, burn them to the ground, salt the earth, start fresh. Because once Rakshasa infiltration reaches a certain threshold, there's no surgical removal, only complete reset. This is why the backwards hands matter so much. They're the early warning system, the one physical detail that can't be faked. If you're suspicious of someone in power, if they're too perfect, too successful, too conveniently positioned, check the hands. If they're always hidden, always gloved, always positioned strangely, that's not paranoia. That's pattern recognition. And if you confirm the backwards hands, run. Don't confront. Don't try to expose them publicly. Because by the time you've gotten close enough to verify, they already know you know. And a Rakshasa whose cover is threatened will act immediately to protect it, which usually means you disappear, quietly, with no one questioning why. Because wealthy nobles and crime lords have resources, and those resources are very good at making problems vanish. The question that haunts anyone who learns about Rakshasa infiltration tactics is simple but terrifying. How many are out there right now? Conservative estimates from Hindu scholars who study the epics suggest that at any given time, roughly 1 in 1,000 wealthy or powerful humans might be Rakshasas in disguise. That sounds small until you scale it. In a kingdom of 1 million people, with perhaps 10,000 individuals wealthy enough to qualify as nobility or successful merchants, that's 10 Rakshasas. 10 demons wearing human faces, controlling significant resources, feeding regularly, and coordinating their activities. 10 might not sound like many, until you realize that 10 wealthy individuals control far more than 10,000 of a kingdom's resources. Wealth concentrates. And in most historical societies, the wealthiest 1% controlled 30 to 50% of all assets, which means those 10 Rakshasas collectively influence 1/3 of the kingdom's economy. And that's conservative estimate. Some scholars argue the ratio is higher, that Rakshasas specifically seek out and replace wealthy humans at such rates that the percentage might reach 5% or higher in particularly corrupt kingdoms. At which point, you're not dealing with infiltration anymore. You're dealing with parallel society, a demon aristocracy masquerading as human nobility. The evidence for higher percentages comes from examining kingdom collapse rates in ancient India. Why do some dynasties end not through invasion or plague, but through mysterious internal decay? Why do certain trade routes suddenly become unprofitable despite no obvious economic changes? Why do entire noble families sometimes vanish within a generation, their estates inherited by distant cousins no one had heard of before? Rakshasa activity explains these patterns better than conventional history, because conventional history assumes human actors with human limitations. Rakshasas don't have those limitations. They can wait decades for opportunities, can coordinate across regions without leaving communication trails, can remove entire families and replace them without anyone realizing what happened. So the real answer to how many are out there is probably unknowable by design, because Rakshasas who are good at their jobs remain undetected. The ones we know about from epics and legends are the failures, the ones who got caught, the ones whose disguises slipped or whose feeding got sloppy or whose bad luck led to encountering heroes. The successful ones? We don't know about them, because that's what success means in infiltration. No one realizes you were ever there. This creates a paranoia problem for anyone who takes Rakshasa lore seriously. If wealthy, powerful people might be demons in disguise, who can you trust? How do you build functional society when you suspect everyone in authority of being supernatural predators? Hindu tradition addresses this through a combination of vigilance and acceptance. The vigilance part involves watching for warning signs, the backwards hands, the aversion to holy sites, the unusual feeding habits, the lack of genuine emotional connections, the too perfect social performance that never quite cracks. But vigilance alone isn't enough, because Rakshasas are good at avoiding detection. So Hindu tradition also teaches acceptance. Yes, some nobles might be demons. Yes, some crime lords are definitely demons. And yes, you probably can't do anything about it individually. But society continues. Markets function. Laws operate. And as long as the demons maintain order while they feed, as long as their predation stays below certain thresholds, as long as they don't destabilize everything, maybe that's tolerable. Not ideal, but tolerable. This is darker philosophy than Western audiences typically expect from religious texts. But Hindu cosmology has always been comfortable with moral ambiguity. The universe contains both order and chaos, good and evil, creation and destruction. And sometimes the beings maintaining order are demons in disguise. Sometimes the forces of chaos are actually preserving balance. Reality is complicated. The Rakshasas who disguise themselves as nobles and crime lords aren't anomalies in this worldview. They're participants. Actors in a cosmic drama where roles blur and intentions matter less than outcomes. A Rakshasa maintaining order while feeding is functionally equivalent to a human maintaining order while also benefiting personally. Both are predators. Both extract resources from the system. The question isn't, should we eliminate all predators? Because that's impossible. The question is, are the predators keeping the infrastructure functional? And if the answer is yes, then maybe you don't check the hands too carefully. Maybe you don't ask uncomfortable questions about where the crime lord's enemies really went. Maybe you accept that the noble who never shakes hands and always wears gloves is eccentric but effective. Because the alternative, destabilizing society to root out hidden demons, might cause more harm than the demons themselves. Especially since killing a Rakshasa just makes it reform in hell and return angrier. You can't permanently solve the problem through violence. You can only manage it. This pragmatic approach appears throughout Hindu epics. Heroes kill Rakshasas when they become too disruptive, when their feeding gets excessive, when their corruption spreads too far. But heroes don't hunt every Rakshasa. Don't try to eliminate them entirely, because that would require dismantling society itself. Instead, they maintain balance, kill the worst offenders, protect the most vulnerable, and accept that some demons will always be hiding in positions of power. That's just the nature of reality. Vigilance without paranoia. Action without overreaction. For modern audiences, this creates an uncomfortable lens through which to view wealth and authority. Because if we accept Rakshasa infiltration as metaphor rather than literal truth, the implications remain disturbing. How many wealthy, powerful people are functionally operating like Rakshasas, extracting resources, feeding on the vulnerable, maintaining appearances while hiding predatory nature? And how much should we tolerate before the balance tips too far? Those questions don't have clean answers, which is probably why Hindu texts don't try to provide them. Instead, they tell stories about heroes who fought demons, about kingdoms that fell to corruption, about the eternal struggle between dharma and chaos. And they leave it to each generation to decide what those stories mean in their specific context. But they always emphasize the backwards hands. Because no matter how perfect the disguise, no matter how convincing the performance, that one physical detail remains. The tell, the crack in the mask. The proof that something inhuman is pretending to be human. And if you ever find yourself in a position of suspecting someone powerful, someone wealthy, someone who seems just slightly too perfect in their role, remember what you're looking for. Not proof of evil, not evidence of supernatural nature, just the direction their palms face when their hands are at rest. If they face outward, if the thumbs point wrong, if there's even a moment where you see clearly that the hands don't match the rest of the body, then you know. And what you do with that knowledge is your choice. Confront them and likely die. Flee and hope they don't notice. Or accept it and continue living in a society where demons wear crowns and control empires. All three options have appeared in Hindu texts. All three are presented as legitimate responses, because there's no universal answer to how you handle discovering that the people in charge aren't people. There's only the knowledge that they exist, that they're sophisticated, that they've been doing this for thousands of years, and that they're very, very good at what they do. But understanding why Rakshasas target wealth and power is only half the picture. The other half is understanding how they maintain it, the daily reality of living as someone else, the constant vigilance required to keep the mask from slipping, the psychological toll of never, not even for a moment, being able to drop the disguise, the mechanics of living as someone else, day after day, year after year, are more complex than simply looking right. A Rakshasa who successfully replaces a wealthy noble or crime lord isn't done working. The work is just beginning. And the psychological strain of maintaining a perfect disguise while suppressing every demonic instinct is, frankly, the kind of stress that would send most humans into therapy within a week. Except Rakshasas don't get therapy. They get centuries of pretending their favorite meal isn't the person sitting across the dinner table. Morning routines expose the first major challenge. Humans have rituals. They wake up, stretch, yawn, perform personal hygiene. All normal, automatic behaviors that Rakshasas have to consciously remember to perform. Because a demon's natural morning routine involves checking if any prey wandered near the lair overnight, and perhaps eating whatever got too close. So the Rakshasa noble wakes up in silk sheets, which is pleasant enough, and then has to remember, humans don't immediately scan for threats. They don't evaluate everyone in the household as potential meals. They certainly don't instinctively calculate which servant would provide the most sustenance versus which would be missed least. Instead, they ring a bell, request tea, make polite conversation about the weather while someone who smells delicious helps them dress. This is the correct human behavior. This is what the target would have done. So the Rakshasa does it too, while every instinct screams that the servant's throat is right there, exposed, and feeding would take approximately 4 seconds. Professional restraint is not eating your valet. That's the actual job requirement. Which sounds simple until you remember Rakshasas are predators, pretending to be prey animals, pretending to be predators who've agreed to follow social rules. The layers of deception get exhausting. Breakfast presents the food problem. Nobles eat elaborate meals, multiple courses, foods prepared by skilled chefs. All of it tastes like cardboard to a Rakshasa. Their taste buds are designed for raw flesh, preferably human, ideally still warm. Everything else is just substance, fuel without flavor. But the Rakshasa noble must not only eat it, must appear to enjoy it, must compliment the preparation, must have preferences and opinions about seasoning. So they develop a system. Memorize which foods the target enjoyed. Practice making pleased expressions. Learn to distinguish properly cooked from overcooked, even though both taste equally bland. It's the supernatural equivalent of someone with no sense of smell becoming a wine critic. Technically possible through memorization and performance. Deeply, profoundly tedious. Some Rakshasas solve this by hiring terrible cooks. That way, complaints about the food seem reasonable rather than suspicious. This meal is inedible works whether you're a demon who can't taste or a noble with genuinely bad kitchen staff. The excuse covers both scenarios, which is efficient problem solving that also saves the Rakshasa from pretending to enjoy food that, to them, all tastes like unseasoned cardboard anyway. Then comes the daily schedule. Nobles have responsibilities, court appearances, business meetings, social obligations. Each one requires the Rakshasa to maintain character for hours while surrounded by people who might notice inconsistencies. At court, this means listening to disputes about land boundaries and inheritance laws. Topics that bore most humans, but are absolutely excruciating to immortal demons who've watched these same arguments play out across centuries. Yes, you're feuding about a property line. Your great-great-great-grandfather feuded about the exact same property line. Nothing's changed except the specific humans making the complaints. Lovely use of everyone's time. But the Rakshasa noble must appear engaged, must ask relevant questions, must make judgments that align with legal precedent and the target's known positions, all while resisting the urge to simply eat everyone in the room and solve the property dispute through vacancy. Business meetings are worse in different ways, because these involve money, contracts, long-term planning, things that matter enormously to humans with finite lifespans, but matter barely at all to immortal beings. A merchant panicking about quarterly profits isn't thinking in terms of centuries. To them, 3 months is significant. To a Rakshasa, 3 months is barely worth tracking. So the Rakshasa must fake urgency about timelines that feel, to them, approximately as pressing as worrying whether it might rain next Tuesday. Sure, technically it matters. But also, Does it really? Will anyone remember this specific contract negotiation in 100 years? No? Then why is everyone so stressed? But showing that attitude would break character. The target cared about quarterly profits. So the Rakshasa noble cares too, or pretends to, which means learning to simulate anxiety about made-up deadlines and perform enthusiasm about financial projections that, honestly, probably won't matter because humans die and Rakshasas don't, and the whole economic system is built on assumptions of mortality that don't apply here. The translation for "I'm concerned about market volatility" in this context is "I'm pretending to care about imaginary problems because humans need constant validation that their temporary concerns are important." But you can't say that out loud. So the Rakshasa noble nods thoughtfully and suggests conservative investment strategies, which is the correct wealthy person response, regardless of whether you actually care. Social obligations create different stress. Because nobles socialize. They attend balls, dinners, gatherings, places where people expect wit, charm, and genuine human connection. 3 things Rakshasas are spectacularly bad at faking long-term. Wit requires understanding humor. Rakshasas understand humor intellectually. They know the mechanics. Setup, subversion, timing. But they don't feel it. Jokes are just word patterns to them. So when someone makes a clever observation at a dinner party, the Rakshasa must remember to laugh at appropriate volume for appropriate duration. Not too much, not too little. Precisely the amount the target would have laughed. Except the target's sense of humor died with them. And the Rakshasa is working from memory of surface thoughts, which didn't include complete records of every joke the target ever found amusing. So there are gaps. Jokes land differently than expected. The Rakshasa laughs half a second too late or too early. And somewhere, observant guest thinks, "Lord, whoever seems slightly off tonight." That's how discovery begins. Not traumatic revelation. Small accumulating inconsistencies that make people suspicious. Charm is even harder to fake, because charm requires vulnerability, showing weakness, insecurity, genuine emotion. Things that create connection between humans. But Rakshasas don't do vulnerability. They're apex predators. Showing weakness in their world means death. So even disguised as humans, even perfectly mimicking surface behavior, they can't quite manage the authentic emotional exposure that makes humans trust each other. This creates a problem. The Rakshasa noble is charming in a technical sense, says the right words, makes the right gestures. But there's something missing. An emotional hollowness that people can't quite identify, but definitely sense. Like talking to someone who's performing being human rather than actually being human. Which, to be fair, is exactly what's happening. But it's not supposed to be obvious. So the Rakshasi compensates by being slightly distant, slightly cold, developing a reputation as someone who's professional, competent, but not particularly warm. This works because humans already expect nobles and crime lords to be emotionally reserved. The wealth and power come with assumed personality traits. Being cold isn't suspicious. It's on brand. The backwards hands remain the constant physical concern. At social gatherings, this becomes almost comically difficult to manage, because humans gesticulate when they talk. They use their hands expressively. They shake hands in greeting. They touch shoulders, arms, faces, all casual physical contact that the Rakshasa must either avoid or perform in ways that hide palm orientation. Some develop elaborate gestural languages that look natural, but keep palms concealed. They talk with closed fists. They gesture with the back of the hand forward. They develop reputations for unusual but distinctive mannerisms. Oh Lord, whoever always does that thing with his hands. It's just his way. Perfect cover. The behavior is distinctive enough to be memorable, which makes it seem intentional rather than suspicious. It's not hiding something wrong. It's personal quirk that makes him unique. Humans attribute personality to patterns. Give them a pattern, and they'll build a story around it that explains away everything. Others wear gloves constantly. Plain allergies, sensitive skin, old burns. Whatever excuse justifies never exposing their palms. This works better in some contexts than others. At formal events, gloves are normal. At private dinners, less so. But wealthy people are eccentric. If Lord whoever wants to wear gloves at dinner, that's just another quirk. Probably has a tragic backstory involving childhood trauma. Best not to ask. The Rakshasa encourages this speculation. Lets people construct explanations that excuse the behavior without the Rakshasa having to lie directly. It's more efficient that way. Why invent the backstory when your audience will invent one for you? The feeding schedule has to be carefully managed around social obligations. Because Rakshasas need to eat. Their actual food. Not the decorative human meals, but real sustenance. And finding private time to consume human flesh in a mansion full of servants requires planning. Most Rakshasa nobles feed late at night. After everyone's asleep, they use secret passages, locked rooms, underground chambers, places where screens, if they happen, won't carry. And they dispose of evidence meticulously. Bones buried in gardens. Ashes scattered in rivers. Nothing left that could be discovered accidentally. But this creates time pressure. Between social obligations, business responsibilities, court appearances, and mandatory human sleep schedules, there's maybe 3 to 4 hours per night for actual feeding and disposal, which is tight, especially if the prey fights back. Professional Rakshasas plan their meals in advance. Identify targets weeks ahead. People who won't be missed. Travelers, criminals, transients. Arrange for them to visit the estate at specific times, usually late evening, usually under pretense of business or service work. They arrive. They enter the private wing. They never leave. From the outside, it looks like the noble occasionally has evening appointments, maybe business meetings, maybe liaisons, maybe just prefers evening hours for certain activities. All normal wealthy person behavior. Nothing suspicious. Inside, it's a slaughterhouse on a schedule. The psychological strain of this double's existence wears differently on different Rakshasas. Some handle it fine. Treat it like any job. Clock in, perform noble duties, clock out, eat someone, repeat. They compartmentalize effectively. The noble persona is work clothes. The demon underneath is who they really are. One's performance, one's authentic. Neither conflicts with the other, because they're kept separate. Others struggle, because spending decades performing humanity starts affecting how you think. You develop habits, preferences, opinions that the target never had. You find yourself actually caring about contract negotiations, actually enjoying certain human foods despite them tasting like nothing, actually feeling annoyed when someone's rude at a dinner party. At which point the question emerges, are you still pretending? Or have you, in some meaningful sense, become the person you're impersonating? Hindu texts include stories about Rakshasas who forgot they were Rakshasas, lived complete human lives, raised families, grew old, seemingly, through careful shapeshifting that mimicked aging, died peacefully in bed surrounded by loved ones, and only then, at death, suddenly remembered, oh, right, I'm immortal. I'm not human. None of that was real. Except it was real. They experienced it, felt it, made choices based on human values they'd internalized so completely they forgot they were performance. So was it fake? Or had the Rakshasa genuinely transformed into something human adjacent through sheer sustained effort? Philosophy debate aside, the practical implication is that long-term infiltration changes the infiltrator. Rakshasas who maintain noble disguises for centuries aren't the same as Rakshasas fresh from hell. They're mellower, more cautious, more interested in maintaining stability than causing chaos. Because chaos threatens the comfortable life they've built. This creates an interesting dynamic. Young, aggressive Rakshasas want to dominate openly, take what they want through force, live as obvious demons. But older Rakshasas who've experienced comfort, luxury, stability, they're conservative. They oppose disruption. They work to maintain systems that benefit them. Which means established Rakshasa nobles often end up fighting younger Rakshasas who threaten the social order. Not out of love for humanity, out of pure self-interest. The system works. Don't break what's working. And if some idiot young demon wants to start eating nobles openly and attracting hero attention, that idiot gets removed. Quietly, permanently. Rakshasa society, to the extent it exists among infiltrators, is hierarchical and brutally pragmatic. Older, established demons control resources. Younger demons want those resources. But openly challenging elders means exposing yourself, breaking cover, losing the disguise that makes predation easy. So instead, young Rakshasas infiltrate adjacent positions, become advisors to the Rakshasa noble, or rival merchants, or allied crime lords, build their own power bases. And wait, because they're immortal. They can afford to wait decades for the established demon to make a mistake or get killed by heroes. It's office politics, except everyone involved is a man-eating shapeshifter, and the stakes are who gets to be fake duke of wherever for the next century. Thrilling stuff. Really, close calls happen more frequently than Rakshasas would prefer, because humans are observant, suspicious, and occasionally very, very perceptive. A servant notices the noble never eats the meat at breakfast, despite claiming to love it. A business partner realizes Lord Whoever's handwriting changed slightly after that illness last year. A family member catches a glimpse of backwards hands during an unguarded moment. None of these are conclusive, but they're concerning, and the Rakshasa has to address them immediately before suspicion spreads. The servant who noticed the breakfast meat problem? Promoted, moved to a different estate, killed, whatever removes them from daily contact with the Rakshasa noble, while seeming like reasonable personnel management. She was too good for kitchen work. Gave her a better position, managing the rural properties. Everyone's happy, except the servant, who's either relocated or dead, depending on how much of a threat she posed. The business partner who mentioned the handwriting, distracted, given a lucrative contract that requires travel. Or a minor scandal emerges involving his personal life that consumes his attention. Or he has an accident. Tragic, but explainable. These things happen, and now he's no longer in position to compare handwriting samples. The family member who saw the backwards hands? This is delicate. You can't just kill family without raising questions. So the Rakshasa gaslights them. You must have seen wrong. The light was dim. You were tired. Maybe you've been stressed lately. Have you considered taking a vacation? Plant doubt. Make them question their own perceptions. And if that doesn't work, more aggressive measures become necessary. Discredit them. Make them seem unstable. Get other family members to dismiss their concerns. Uncle always sees things that aren't there. It's sad, really. Maybe he needs rest. Maybe somewhere quiet, away from everyone, for his own good. And just like that, the observant family member gets committed to some remote location where their warnings can't reach anyone who'd believe them. Problem solved. The Rakshasa's disguise remains intact. And everyone agrees it was the kindest thing to do for poor Uncle Whoever, who's clearly losing his faculties. The cruelty is almost impressive, not the violence. The manipulation. The way Rakshasas turn human social structures into weapons against humans trying to expose them. The way they use people's trust, compassion, and social norms to isolate threats and maintain control. Because that's ultimately what the wealthy noble disguise provides. Not just resources, not just feeding opportunities, but social infrastructure that protects the disguise itself. The wealth creates authority. Authority creates trust. Trust creates latitude. And latitude means you can get away with things that would be immediately suspicious if you were poor. Crime lords have similar protections, but more direct. Someone suspects you're not human? That person becomes a threat to the organization. Threats get eliminated. No explanation needed. No elaborate gaslighting required. Just violence. And everyone assumes it's business, because that's what crime lords do. Remove threats. Nobody questions the method. The difference in approach reflects the different social contexts. Nobles must maintain appearances of civilization. Can't be overtly violent without losing status. So they use subtle methods, social manipulation, psychological warfare, things that leave no physical evidence. Crime lords operate in a context where violence is expected, so they use it efficiently. The threat gets stabbed. Problem solved. Move on to next problem. Both work. Both have maintained successful Rakshasa infiltrations for centuries. The choice depends on the demon's personality and which approach they find less exhausting, because that's the real limiting factor. Not capability, exhaustion. Maintaining a disguise day after day, year after year, century after century takes psychological toll, even on immortal demons, even on creatures designed for deception. The weight of pretending accumulates. The mask becomes heavy, and eventually something breaks. Sometimes it's the disguise. The Rakshasa makes a mistake, gets caught, gets killed, reforms in hell, starts over with a new target. Sometimes it's the Rakshasa. The demon gives up, drops the disguise, lives openly as a monster, survives as long as it can before heroes inevitably arrive, dies fighting rather than hiding. At least it's honest. And sometimes, rarely, it's neither. The Rakshasa integrates so completely that the boundary between performance and reality dissolves. They become the person they're pretending to be, not through forgetting, through choosing, through deciding that this life, this identity, is preferable to their original nature. Are they still Rakshasas at that point? Technically, yes. Biologically unchanged, immoral, capable of violence. But functionally? Behaviorally? Maybe not. Maybe they've become something new, something between human and demon, something Hindu texts don't have clear terminology for because it wasn't supposed to be possible. But it happens. Rarely. Usually with Rakshasas who maintain disguises for multiple human generations, who watch the families they're pretending to be part of grow, change, die, who find themselves caring about outcomes beyond their own survival and comfort. They're still predators, still feed on humans, still possess all the abilities and instincts of their kind. But they're predators who follow rules, who limit their feeding, who've developed something resembling ethics because uncontrolled predation threatens the system they've learned to value. Hindu tradition doesn't celebrate these Rakshasas, doesn't hold them up as reformed demons, because they're still demons, still dangerous, still fundamentally opposed to Dharma. But it acknowledges they exist, acknowledges that even demons can change, not into something good, but into something less actively destructive, which, for immortal man-eating shapeshifters, might be the closest thing to redemption available. Because killing demons is satisfying. Killing their infrastructure is significantly harder. And the infrastructure is what lets them keep coming back. When dining with nobility, the hands tell stories. When negotiating with crime lords, the hands reveal truths. And when someone powerful offers opportunities that seem too good to be true, the question isn't just what they're getting from the arrangement. It's whether they're willing to show you their palms while discussing it. The answer to that second question matters more than you'd think. Romantic relationships present a specific nightmare for Rakshasa nobles, because humans expect wealthy people to marry, to produce heirs, to continue family lines. All things that require intimacy that Rakshasas absolutely cannot provide without breaking their disguise immediately. The logistics are straightforward but depressing. You cannot maintain a marriage to someone while hiding that your hands are backwards. You eat human flesh, and your emotional range consists of hungry, satisfied, and annoyed that I can't eat you. That's not a relationship. That's Stockholm Syndrome waiting to happen. So Rakshasas develop strategies. The most common is strategic widowhood. Replace a noble who's already married. Wait a few months. Wife dies tragically. Probably illness. Maybe accident. Very sad. Everyone sympathizes. Lord, whoever is devastated. Needs time to grieve. Won't remarry. Too heartbroken. Perfect cover. The grief explains emotional distance. Explains why he avoids intimate situations. Explains why he never entertains romantic prospects despite being wealthy and available. He's mourning forever. It's romantic in a tragic sort of way. And it requires killing exactly one person, which is efficient demon problem solving. Less murderous Rakshasas marry, but maintain distant relationships. Separate bedrooms, minimal physical contact. Busy schedules that keep spouses apart most days. This works if you replace nobles who already had that kind of marriage. Upper-class couples often lived essentially separate lives anyway. Marriage was business arrangement. Romance was optional, sometimes actively discouraged. So the Rakshasa noble simply continues the pattern, produces an heir somehow, usually through methods we don't need to examine too closely involving magic and deception, then spends the rest of the marriage traveling on business. Wife stays home managing estates. Husband is perpetually elsewhere. They meet occasionally for formal dinners, where everyone's wearing gloves and nobody touches anybody. Sustainable? Barely. The spouse usually figures out something's wrong. But without concrete evidence, without knowing what they're looking for, they can't articulate the problem. My husband seems wrong isn't grounds for annulment. It's just marriage, which is frequently disappointing, even when nobody's secretly a demon. The heir problem is worse, because children ask questions, observe patterns, and they're around constantly during formative years when observations stick. A Rakshasa noble who has to raise a child faces two options. Do it badly, which creates suspicion, or do it well, which means developing genuine emotional attachment to a human, which is definitely not what demons are supposed to do. Most choose the first option. Become distant fathers. Delegate children to servants and tutors. Only interact with the child during formal occasions. This creates emotionally damaged heirs, but emotionally damaged heirs are common enough among nobility that nobody questions it. Probably trauma from watching his mother die, or genetics, or the pressures of wealth. Whatever explanation makes sense. The few Rakshasas who choose the second option, who genuinely parent their human children, face a different problem. Attachment. Caring about someone you're not supposed to care about. Experiencing protective instincts toward a being you theoretically regard as food. This is how you get Rakshasas who forget they're Rakshasas. Start with parenting. Add a century of maintaining the disguise. Mix in genuine affection for the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, family line you've watched grow. And suddenly, you're a demon who'd rather die than let anything harm your descendants. Which is very far from standard Rakshasa behavior, but here we are. Hindu texts call these Rakshasas corrupted by humanity, which is hilarious because usually corruption goes the other direction. But apparently spending enough time around humans, genuinely caring about them despite yourself, breaks something fundamental in demon psychology. You develop ethics, restraint, love even. All things that make you worse at being a demon, but arguably better at being a person. Whether this counts as redemption, or just advanced Stockholm Syndrome, is left as an exercise for the reader. Servant management is its own specialized nightmare, because servants see everything. They're in your private spaces. They handle your clothing, your food, your correspondence. They know your schedule better than you do, and they talk to each other. Gossip is the primary entertainment in any large household. So the Rakshasa noble has to carefully manage what information servants can access and what conclusions they might draw from it. This means compartmentalization. Different servants handle different tasks. Nobody gets complete picture. The valet knows about the gloves and the strange eating habits. The cook knows about the late-night food orders. The night staff knows about the occasional visitors who don't leave. But nobody knows all three. And if anyone starts connecting patterns, starts asking questions across service divisions, they get removed. Promoted to a position that takes them out of the household. Married off with generous dowry. Relocated to distant estates. Or, if they're particularly problematic, they become thinner. The irony being that the servant investigating the strange disappearances becomes a strange disappearance themselves. Lovely use of situational irony there. New servants are carefully selected, preferably ones who don't ask questions, who are grateful enough for employment that they won't jeopardize it by being observant. Ideally ones with limited social connections, so if they do vanish, nobody investigates thoroughly. This creates households staffed by desperate, isolated people who are paid well but kept ignorant of what they're enabling. Which is exactly how you design a support structure for hidden predation. Keep your helpers dependent, poorly informed, and just scared enough that they don't look too closely at the details. The ones who figure it out anyway, who piece together enough observations to realize their employer is wrong somehow, face an interesting choice. Stay and pretend ignorance, hoping the demon never realizes they know. Or flee and hope they get far enough away before the Rakshasa decides they're a loose end worth eliminating. Most stay, because fleeing means giving up stable employment, good wages, and shelter. And they can't prove anything. Can't go to authorities with my employer's hands bend weird, and I think he eats people. That's not evidence. That's grounds for dismissal, and possibly commitment to an asylum. So they stay, work, keep their heads down, and pray that whatever's wrong with Lord, whoever never decides they're the next meal. Which is pragmatic survival strategy that also explains why Rakshasa nobles can maintain their disguises despite servants witnessing concerning behavior. The servants know. They just can't do anything about it, and the Rakshasa knows they know. But as long as they stay quiet, everyone benefits from maintaining the fiction. It's an agreement, unspoken, mutually beneficial, and absolutely horrifying once you think about it for more than 30 seconds. Inter-Rakshasa rivalry deserves special attention because it's vicious. When two Rakshasas control adjacent territories, or compete for the same resources, or simply hate each other for centuries-old grudges, they don't fight openly. That would expose both of them. Instead, they fight through proxies, social manipulation, and sabotage so subtle that humans mistake it for normal political conflict. Rakshasa Noble A wants Rakshasa Noble B's territory. Can't just kill him. Too obvious. Instead, A engineers B's financial ruin through market manipulation. Spreads rumors about B's judgment. Plants evidence suggesting B is embezzling from the crown. Gets B's human allies to turn against him through careful social engineering. B responds by arranging unfortunate accidents for A's business partners. By exposing A's secret mistresses, except the mistresses are fabricated, but the evidence is convincing. By manipulating A's heir into making disastrous decisions that undermine A's reputation. From the outside, this looks like normal noble feuding, political intrigue, power struggles. Nobody realizes they're watching two immortal demons play century-long chess game using human lives as pieces. The irony is that these rivalries often stabilize society, because Rakshasas focused on fighting each other have less time and attention for feeding indiscriminately. They're too busy sabotaging rival demons to bother with excessive predation, which means human populations in areas with multiple competing Rakshasas sometimes fare better than areas with single dominant demon who has no checks on his behavior. Accidentally beneficial competition. It's like market economics except the competing forces are shape-shifting man-eaters, and the commodity being traded is human suffering. Close calls, the actual near-exposure moments, are where the stress of maintaining disguise becomes most visible. These are the times when everything almost falls apart, when humans get too close to the truth, when the mask nearly slips, and when the Rakshasa has to decide, can this be recovered, or does everyone nearby need to die? Example 1. The dinner party incident. Rakshasa noble is hosting elaborate feast, multiple courses, dozens of guests, everything proceeding normally, until dessert arrives and the noble realizes too late that the target whose identity he stole was allergic to strawberries. Severe, life-threatening allergy, the kind everyone present would know about. And dessert is strawberry-based, multiple dishes, everyone watching to see if he'll eat it. The Rakshasa has maybe 10 seconds to make a decision. Eat it and risk people noticing he's not showing allergic reaction. Refuse it and explain why, hoping his improvised reasoning matches what the target would have said. Or create a distraction so dramatic that nobody notices the food problem. Professional Rakshasa chooses option 3. Causes servant to accidentally drop an entire tray. Creates chaos. Everyone's attention diverts. In the confusion, he doesn't eat dessert and nobody notices. Crisis averted through property damage and quick thinking. But he knows now. That was close. Too close. And if he hadn't recognized the strawberries in time, if someone had called attention to it directly, the entire disguise collapses. One mistake, one overlooked detail, and decades of infiltration end because of fruit-based desserts, which is perhaps the most embarrassing way for a demon to get exposed. So thank whatever dark gods watch over Rakshasas that he noticed in time. Example 2. The medical emergency. Rakshasa noble is injured during hunting accident. Arrow to the shoulder. Serious wound. Requires doctor, except doctors see things. They examine bodies. They notice that under the skin, the anatomy is wrong. Bones positioned strangely. Muscle structure that doesn't match human physiology. Blood that's the wrong color. The Rakshasa, bleeding and in genuine pain because arrows hurt regardless of species, has to refuse medical treatment. Insists it's minor. Won't let the doctor examine it properly. Creates resistance that seems suspicious but necessary. Doctor insists. It's his job. The wound is serious. Infection risk is high. Protocol demands examination. The Rakshasa makes a choice, uses magic, reads the doctor's mind, identifies his fears, desires, weaknesses, then exploits them, threatens the doctor's family, bribes him with massive payment, or simply breaks his mind through psychic attack that leaves him compliant but damaged. Treatment proceeds under Rakshasa-controlled conditions. Doctor sees what the Rakshasa allows him to see. Wound gets bandaged. Everyone survives. Except the doctor, who's now either bought, broken, or blackmailed. Another loose end tied down through violence and intimidation. The wound heals supernaturally fast because Rakshasas regenerate. 2 weeks later, noble is fine. Doctor is haunted. And everyone agrees the recovery was miraculous. Probably divine intervention. Certainly not evidence that the patient's biology works differently than human norms. Example 3. The child's observation. Noble's young son, maybe 6 years old, walks into his father's study unexpectedly. Catches the Rakshasa noble without gloves, hands visible, backwards palms obvious. Child stares, processes, says, "Daddy, your hands look funny." The Rakshasa has infinite time to plan, centuries of experience, all the magical abilities and cunning that make him apex predator. And he's being defeated by the observation skills of a small human child who doesn't understand why this is wrong, just knows it doesn't match what hands should look like. Several options immediately available. Kill the child. Problems solved, but creates different problems. Gaslighting the child won't work. They're too young to doubt their own perception. Bribing them is possible, but unreliable. Children tell secrets. The Rakshasa chooses option 4, magic. He alters the child's memory, not removing it entirely, changing it. The child now remembers. Daddy was wearing gloves. They looked funny. That's what was odd. The gloves, not the hands. Memory magic is difficult, dangerous, and not entirely reliable, but it works often enough. The child accepts the new memory, mentions to mother that daddy's new gloves look strange. Mother agrees. Conversation moves on. Crisis averted. But the Rakshasa knows. That was the closest call yet. His own child almost exposed him. And if it hadn't been for magic, if he'd been in the situation where spellcasting wasn't possible, the entire infiltration would have ended, because children are observant and honest in ways that adults have been trained out of. These close calls accumulate. Each one is stress. Each one is reminder that the disguise is fragile, that 1,000 things maintain it, and any single one failing brings everything down. The gloves that hide hands, the excuses that explain behavior, the money that buys silence, the magic that alters memories, the violence that removes witnesses. Remove any single piece, and the structure collapses, which means the Rakshasa noble must maintain all pieces simultaneously, constantly, forever. Or at least until he decides the stress isn't worth the luxury anymore and abandons the disguise for more straightforward demon existence. Which brings us to the question of why they don't all just quit. If it's this hard, this exhausting, this risky, why continue? Why not just accept being an open demon and deal with the consequences? The answer always comes back to the same thing: quality of life. Being a demon living in forests, being hunted, struggling for every meal, is objectively terrible. Being a demon disguised as wealthy noble, sleeping in comfortable bed, having food delivered reliably, never worrying about heroes, because nobody knows you're a target, that's objectively better. So they endure. They maintain the disguise despite the stress. They manage the close calls. They eliminate the witnesses. They gaslight the children. They do whatever necessary to preserve the comfortable life they've built, because the alternative is worse. And when you're immortal, worse lasts forever. But sometimes, despite all the careful planning, despite centuries of experience, despite every defensive measure, the disguise fails anyway. The close calls accumulate into actual exposure. The carefully maintained lie collapses. And when that happens, when the Rakshasa can no longer hide what it is, everything changes. When the disguise fails, when exposure becomes inevitable, the Rakshasa noble faces a choice that most demons never have to make. Flee and survive, or fight and probably die defending a pile of furniture and some legal documents claiming ownership of land you stole from someone you ate. Most choose the furniture, which tells you everything about how comfortable living corrupts even immortal predators. The typical exposure scenario doesn't start with dramatic revelation. It starts with suspicion. Someone noticed something, asked questions, connected patterns. Maybe a traveling hero or groomers. Maybe a priest detected wrongness during a blessing. Maybe that observant servant finally found someone who'd listen. However it begins, once suspicion exists, it spreads. And Rakshasas, for all their power and cunning, are terrible at damage control once the story gets out, because their entire strategy depends on nobody looking too closely. Once people start looking, really looking, the evidence accumulates fast. The noble who never attends temple, the crime lord whose enemies all vanish completely, the merchant whose ships always lose crew members on specific routes. The pattern becomes obvious once you're searching for it. At this point, the Rakshasa has maybe days before the community organizes a response. And here's where the wealth becomes a trap, because a demon living in a cave can flee immediately. Pack nothing, run, survive. But a Rakshasa who spent decades building an estate, accumulating art, collecting rare wines, and filling warehouses with expensive textiles. That demon has to make a choice: abandon everything or defend it. The rational choice is obvious. You're immortal. Material goods can be replaced. Survival matters more than silk curtains. Leave. Start over somewhere else. You've done it before. You'll do it again. But rationality assumes you haven't spent the last century conditioning yourself to value comfort, to associate identity with possessions, to measure success in terms of wealth accumulated. The Rakshasa noble who chooses this life isn't thinking like a demon anymore. He's thinking like a very wealthy human who happens to eat people. And wealthy humans don't flee. They hire guards. So the Rakshasa starts making calls, pulling favors, activating networks of human allies who don't know they're working for a demon. By the time the heroes arrive, the estate is defended by mercenaries, loyal retainers, and possibly other Rakshasas who have strategic interest in maintaining the disguise's viability. Not out of friendship, out of fear that if one disguised demon gets exposed and killed, heroes might start checking other nobles' hands too. The siege that follows is less heroic battle against evil and more hostile takeover of a corrupt business, because that's what it is. The Rakshasa isn't defending his life. He's defending his assets. And assets can be used as weapons when you're creative enough. The Rakshasa noble has money. Money buys soldiers. Soldiers create casualties. And every casualty makes the heroes question whether this is worth it. Is killing one demon worth losing a dozen human lives? Especially when killing the demon just sends it back to hell where it reforms and returns? Some heroes decide it's not worth it. They leave. The Rakshasa survives. Reputation damaged, but alive. And he learns. Increases guards. Improves security. Implements deeper background checks on servants. The exposure attempt actually makes him more careful, more dangerous, better at hiding. Other heroes decide it's absolutely worth it. They push through, fight past the guards, breach the estate, and finally confront the demon in person. This is where Rakshasas usually die. Not because heroes are stronger, but because the Rakshasa, cornered in his mansion, refuses to flee even when escape is still possible. He fights to defend property that means nothing except his symbol of the life he built. It's pride, stupidity, and the fatal flaw that wealth creates in predators. They forget they're predators. Start thinking they're owners, landlords, businessmen. And businessmen don't abandon their businesses, even when staying means death. They negotiate. They bribe. They try to make deals right up until the hero's blessed sword goes through their spine. Which is hilarious if you think about it. Immortal demon with centuries of experience, magical powers, and ability to shapeshift, dies because he couldn't bear to leave his wine collection behind. That's not tragedy. That's comedy. Dark comedy, but still. The hero kills the demon. Everyone celebrates. The estate gets seized. Assets distributed. Justice served. Except three things happen that nobody notices in the victory celebrations. First, the Rakshasa's household staff, who absolutely knew something was wrong, disappear. Not all at once. Gradually over the next few months. Some just leave town. Others die in accidents. A few vanish entirely. These are loose ends. People who saw too much. Who could testify that other nobles exhibit similar behaviors? They're getting cleaned up by the remaining Rakshasas who don't want exposure to spread. Second, a distant cousin of the deceased noble arrives to claim the estate. He has paperwork, legal documents, everything properly filed. He takes possession. Business continues. Within a year, the estate operates exactly as it did before. Same trade routes, same business partners, same feeding patterns hidden in the same ways. Because the distant cousin is another Rakshasa. Different one, but same species, same strategy. The exposure and killing change nothing, except which specific demon owns the furniture. Third, the hero who led the attack. That hero gets famous, gets celebrated, gets invited to courts across the kingdom to advise on demon hunting. Which means this hero, who just proved they can identify and kill disguised Rakshasas, is now traveling between noble households, spending time with wealthy, powerful people, getting close enough to check hands. Most heroes don't realize the danger until too late. They think they're investigating. They think they're being careful. But they're actually walking into territories controlled by Rakshasas, who now see them as existential threat. And those Rakshasas have home field advantage, have resources, have guards and allies and backup plans. The hero usually dies. Accident, poison, ambush, whatever method leaves minimal evidence and maximum deniability. How tragic. Such a promising young hero. Must have been bandits. Or maybe that head injury from the demon fight was worse than it seemed. These things happen. And just like that, the threat gets neutralized. The other Rakshasas survive. The system continues. The only thing that changed is one demon got replaced by another, and one hero got replaced by dirt. This is why Hindu epics emphasize that killing individual Rakshasas doesn't solve the problem. The problem is structural. It's the infrastructure that enables infiltration, the social systems that make wealth equal authority, the human tendency to trust powerful people without verifying they're human, the fact that checking someone's poems is considered rude in polite society. Fix those things, and Rakshasas can't infiltrate. Leave those things intact, and killing demons becomes whack-a-mole with supernatural enemies who have infinite respawns. The smart heroes, the ones who survive long enough to matter, understand this. They don't just kill the demon. They dismantle the infrastructure, seize the assets, audit the businesses, interview the staff, investigate the network, find all the other nobles who exhibit similar behavioral patterns, check their hands, kill them all in coordinated strikes before any can escape or warn the others. This is what Rama did in the Ramayana. He didn't just kill Ravana. He destroyed Lanka, the entire kingdom, burned it, dismantled the power structures, scattered the population, made sure that even when Ravana reformed in hell, he'd return to nothing. No resources, no kingdom, no infrastructure. Just starting over from scratch. That's what actually stops Rakshasas. Not heroism. Thorough administrative destruction of everything they built, which is significantly less exciting than sword fights, but infinitely more effective. The problem is that most kingdoms can't afford this approach, because destroying a Rakshasa noble's infrastructure means destroying noble infrastructure generally. And noble infrastructure is what runs the kingdom. The trade routes, the taxation systems, the legal frameworks. If you burn it all down to kill one demon, you've just collapsed your own economy. So kingdoms make compromises, kill the demon, seize obvious assets, but leave the underlying systems intact. Install new management, hope they're human, move on. And the Rakshasas, watching from other courts, learn from the failure. Update their strategies, become more careful, make themselves more indispensable to the kingdom's functioning so that exposing them becomes more costly than tolerating them. It's an arms race. Heroes develop better detection methods. Rakshasas develop better disguises. Heroes coordinate across kingdoms. Rakshasas do the same, back and forth. Neither side winning permanently, both adapting. And in the middle, human society keeps functioning, sometimes better, sometimes worse, never quite sure how many of its leaders are demons. The theological implications are uncomfortable. If Rakshasas can successfully disguise themselves as nobles and crime lords for centuries, if they can accumulate power, wealth, and influence indistinguishable from human authority figures, if killing them just means they reform and return, then what exactly makes them the villains? They're predators, yes, They eat people. But human nobles also consume human lives. Through warfare, through harsh justice, through economic systems that grind up the poor. The Rakshasa noble, who feeds on one person per month while maintaining functional trade routes, might actually cause less total human suffering than the purely human noble who starts wars for profit. This is dark moral arithmetic that Hindu texts occasionally acknowledge but never fully resolve. Because the point isn't to justify Rakshasas. The point is to question what makes human authority legitimate. If a demon can successfully impersonate a noble for decades, maintaining order and prosperity while secretly feeding, what does that say about nobility itself? Maybe the disguise works so well because what nobles do and what Rakshasas do aren't that different. Both extract resources from populations. Both use authority to shield their actions from scrutiny. Both maintain power through combination of violence and social performance. The main difference is that Rakshasas are honest about being predators. Humans pretend they're not. This philosophical angle is probably why Rakshasas targeting wealth and authority resonates across millennia. It's not just about scary demons. It's about the masks everyone wears, the performances everyone maintains, the question of where legitimate authority ends and predatory extraction begins, and whether checking someone's hands would reveal anything worth knowing. Modern contexts don't make this less relevant. If anything, increased wealth concentration makes it more relevant. When small percentage of people control vast resources, when authorities act with minimal oversight, when systems are so complex that nobody fully understands how they work, the conditions that enabled Rakshasa infiltration historically exist now at larger scale. You don't need literal shape-shifting demons to have predatory actors disguised as leaders. You just need sufficient wealth to hide behavior and sufficient authority to avoid accountability. And we've built entire systems that provide both. The Rakshasas taught us well, or maybe we taught them. Hard to say who's copying whom at this point. The final question, the one Hindu texts pose but don't answer, is whether this is fixable. Can society organize itself so that predatory infiltration becomes impossible? Or is hierarchy itself the vulnerability? Is accumulation of wealth and power inevitably corrupting, whether the wielder is human or demon? If Rakshasas can maintain their disguises specifically because wealth grants them privacy, authority, and impunity, then removing those advantages would expose them. But it would also fundamentally reshape how society operates. Flatten hierarchies, redistribute resources, create transparency that wealthy people, human and demon alike, desperately oppose. Which means fighting Rakshasas requires fighting the social structures that protect them. And those structures are defended by everyone benefiting from them, including many humans who aren't demons but act functionally identical. This is why the disguise works. It's not that Rakshasas are exceptionally good actors. It's that what they're acting as wealthy predatory authorities is already so normalized that the performance requires minimal adjustment. They're not creating new behaviors. They're amplifying existing ones. And society not only tolerates this, but celebrates it. Wealth is virtue. Power is success. Predation is business acumen. The Rakshasas simply took human values seriously and optimized for them, which makes their infiltration less invasion and more participation. They're not destroying human society. They're succeeding within it, by its own metrics, using its own rules. And that's the really disturbing part. Not that demons hide among us, but that they thrive by doing exactly what society tells everyone to do. Accumulate wealth, seek power, exploit opportunities, eliminate competition, maintain appearances, succeed at all costs. The Rakshasa noble who follows this playbook perfectly is indistinguishable from the human noble who does the same. Both are predators. Both extract resources from populations. Both hide behind authority. The only difference is biology. And if biology is the only distinction, If behavioral outcomes are identical, then maybe the real horror isn't that demons pretend to be human. Maybe it's that humans pretend demons are different. The Rakshasas who disguise themselves as nobles and crime lords succeed because the roles they're playing are already demonic. They don't need to change society to feed. Society is already designed for predation. They just need to participate. Follow the rules. Be successful. And success, by human metrics, looks exactly like what demons do naturally. This is why fighting them is so difficult. You're not fighting foreign invaders. You're fighting the logic of your own system, the values you celebrate, the hierarchies you maintain, the wealthy and powerful you defer to without question. Checking someone's hands only helps if you're willing to act on what you find, and acting means challenging authority, questioning success, doubting wealth. Most people aren't willing to do that. It's easier to assume the wealthy deserve their wealth, that the powerful earn their power, that authorities are legitimate until proven otherwise. And by the time you've proven otherwise, the Rakshasa has enough resources to ensure you can't do anything about it. So they persist, generation after generation, era after era, adapting to new contexts but maintaining the core strategy. Find wealth, assume its shape, use its protections. Feed safely. Repeat. It worked in ancient India. It works now. It'll work tomorrow. Because the fundamental dynamic, wealth-protecting predation, hasn't changed. The Hindu texts that describe Rakshasas weren't just telling scary stories. They were documenting social criticism, warning about what happens when society celebrates accumulation without questioning how accumulation happens, when power is respected regardless of how it's obtained, when checking beneath the surface is considered rude and maintaining appearances is considered virtuous. In that context, the Rakshasa noble isn't the problem. He's the symptom. The problem is the system that makes his disguise work, that rewards his behavior, that protects him from consequences. Kill him, and another takes his place. Because the role exists, the infrastructure supports it, and someone, human or demon, will fill it. This is what the epics tried to teach, why they emphasize destroying infrastructure over killing individuals, why heroes who succeeded didn't just fight demons, but changed the systems that enabled them, why victories weren't measured in body counts, but in social transformation. But that lesson gets lost. People remember the fights, the dramatic confrontations, the hero slaying the monster. They forget the boring parts, the administrative reforms, the legal changes, the social restructuring that made it harder for demons to hide. Because restructuring society is hard, fighting demons is exciting, and excitement sells better than institutional critique. So the stories get simplified. The demon is evil, the hero is good, the victory is clean, and the deeper message about what makes demons possible gets ignored, which is exactly what allows the Rakshasas to keep infiltrating, generation after generation, using the same strategies, exploiting the same vulnerabilities, succeeding in exactly the same ways, because nobody learned the actual lesson. Check the hands, yes, but also question why checking hands is necessary, why wealth grants privacy, why power avoids accountability, why society is structured to protect predators as long as they're successful ones. Until those questions get answered, until the systems change, the Rakshasas will keep winning. Not through superior force, through superior understanding of how human society works and what it actually values underneath its stated ideals. They disguise themselves as nobles and crime lords because those roles are already predatory, already extractive, already normalized. They're not infiltrating enemy territory. They're coming home to a world designed for their success by humans who never quite realized what they were building. And that's why, after everything, after all the heroes and all the battles and all the temporary victories, the Rakshasas remain, not despite human society, because of it, not as invaders, as participants, Playing a game humans created, by rules humans wrote, achieving outcomes humans celebrate. Check the hands if you want, but understand what you're really looking for. Not just backwards palms, but the entire system that makes hiding them worthwhile. And ask yourself, even if the hands are human, does that actually make the predation better? The Rakshasas disguise themselves as the wealthy and powerful because that's where the predation is. They're just being more honest about it than most. Let's look at specific historical cases where the system almost broke, where exposure came close to spreading, where heroes nearly dismantled the infrastructure instead of just killing individual demons. These are the moments Rakshasa still tell cautionary tales about. The Purge of Kashi happened around 800 BCE, according to fragmentary records. A traveling monk noticed that multiple wealthy merchants in the city exhibited identical behavioral quirks. Same hand-hiding techniques, same aversion to temple grounds, same patterns of servants disappearing. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordination. The monk spent years investigating quietly, building evidence, documenting patterns. When he finally went public, he didn't accuse one merchant. He accused 7, simultaneously, with detailed records of their activities, physical descriptions of their hands, testimony from servants who'd fled, everything needed for coordinated action. The city organized, not just heroes. Everyone. They locked down the merchant quarter, checked every wealthy person's hands, found the 7 Rakshasas exactly where the monk said they'd be, plus 3 more nobody had suspected. 10 demons total, running a third of the city's economy. The killing happened fast. The Rakshasas, cornered collectively, couldn't defend all their positions simultaneously. They died, all 10, same day, no escapes. No warnings to other cities. Clean sweep. Then came the hard part. What do you do with 10 abandoned businesses? 10 empty estates? Economic infrastructure suddenly missing its operators? The answer was messy. The city appointed human administrators, tried to continue operations normally, failed at most of them. Because the Rakshasas, despite being demons, were actually competent at trade. Their replacements weren't. Within 5 years, Kashi's economy had collapsed. Not from the demon purge directly, from the incompetent management that followed. The trade routes the Rakshasas had maintained fell apart. The business relationships they cultivated ended. The complex financial instruments they created became unstable. Everything they'd built, which the city depended on, stopped functioning without them. The lesson Rakshasas learned: make yourself indispensable. Don't just extract resources. Provide genuine value. Be so integrated into the economic system that removing you causes more damage than tolerating you. That way, even when exposed, cities might calculate that keeping you alive is less costly than dealing with consequences of killing you. The lesson humans learned: maybe don't kill all the Rakshasas at once. Maybe do it gradually. Maybe develop human expertise in the systems before removing the demons running them. Maybe, and this is the uncomfortable part, maybe tolerance is pragmatic if the alternative is economic collapse. Both groups updated their strategies based on Kashi. Rakshasas became more essential. Humans became more cautious about large-scale purges. And the system adapted towards stable coexistence rather than mutual destruction. Which is probably not the moral of the story anyone wants, but it's the moral the story has. Modern detection would work differently, because modern infrastructure is different. You can't just check hands anymore. Gloves are universal. Everyone wears them sometimes. Social norms around physical contact have changed. Direct verification is harder. But other detection methods exist. Financial forensics, algorithmic pattern recognition, data analysis that identifies anomalies in behavior over time. A Rakshasa maintaining the same noble identity for 60 years would show strange patterns. Never aging properly. Never having medical records that match injuries. never appearing in photographs from certain angles, because the shapeshifting has tells that cameras catch. The trade-off is that modern detection requires modern infrastructure, databases, surveillance, record-keeping, all things that wealthy people, human and demon, oppose because it threatens their privacy. Which means the systems that could detect Rakshasas most easily are the same systems that wealthy humans fight hardest against implementing. Funny how that works. It's almost like privacy protections designed to shield the wealthy from scrutiny benefit predators regardless of species. Some kingdoms, historically, made different calculations. They knew Rakshasas had infiltrated their nobility, had evidence, could act, and deliberately chose not to, made deals instead. The Rakshasa noble could stay, could keep feeding, but had to follow rules, limited predation, specific targets, nothing that destabilized the kingdom. In exchange, the kingdom wouldn't expose them, wouldn't organize purges, wouldn't check other nobles' hands. This is called managed predation in some texts and complete moral bankruptcy in others, depending on whose translation you read. From pragmatic governance perspective, it makes sense. You have a known Rakshasa. You know his capabilities. You know his feeding patterns. You can monitor him, set limits, enforce consequences if he exceeds them. That's better than having unknown Rakshasas operating without oversight. Better the demon you know than the dozen you don't. From ethical perspective, it's horrifying. You're letting a demon eat your citizens in exchange for stability. That's not governance. That's outsourcing murder. And the people being eaten didn't consent to being sacrifices in this arrangement. They're not aware deals were made. They just know that sometimes people vanish and nobody investigates thoroughly. But kingdoms that tried zero-tolerance approaches often fared worse. They'd purge all suspected Rakshasas, collapse their economies, become vulnerable to invasion or internal revolt. Meanwhile, kingdoms that tolerated managed predation stayed stable, prospered, even, and prosperity attracts people. So populations grew, which meant more total humans survived in the tolerant kingdoms, despite the predation, than survived in the pure kingdoms that kept collapsing. Utilitarian mathematics favors keeping the demons, which is perhaps the most disturbing conclusion possible, that maximum human welfare might involve tolerating supernatural predators as long as they follow guidelines. That perfect justice might produce worse outcomes than imperfect accommodation. Hindu texts present this dilemma without resolving it, because it's not resolvable. Both positions are defensible. Both have moral weight. And real-world decisions were made by people with incomplete information, limited resources, and pressure to keep society functioning regardless of philosophical purity. The Rakshasas understood this. The successful ones, the ones who maintained their disguises for centuries, didn't just threaten. They negotiated, offered services, made themselves useful beyond just not being actively destructive. They mediated disputes, managed trade, provided stability, became pillars of the community. And in exchange, the community looked the other way about the occasional missing person. Unspoken agreement, mutually beneficial arrangement, absolutely monstrous once you examine it closely. But it worked. Kept working. Still works in the metaphorical sense, where we tolerate all sorts of predatory behavior from authorities as long as systems keep functioning. The economic analysis gets darker. Feeding one person per month equals 12 deaths annually. Sounds horrifying. But a kingdom at war loses thousands annually. A kingdom with famine loses tens of thousands. A kingdom in economic collapse loses hundreds of thousands. If the Rakshasa noble's presence prevents war through skilled diplomacy, prevents famine through efficient trade management, prevents collapse through economic expertise, then his predation saves lives overall. This is trolley problem on civilizational scale. Allow 12 deaths to prevent thousands. And the 12 victims don't get to vote on the arrangement. Don't even know they're being sacrificed. Just know that one day they visited the noble's estate and never came home. Their families grieve, investigate, hit walls. Everyone with power has reasons to not investigate too closely. Eventually they accept it. Unfortunate tragedy. These things happen. Move on, and the system continues. 12 more next year. 12 more the year after. Forever. Or until something breaks the arrangement. What breaks it usually isn't moral awakening. It's practical failure. The Rakshasa gets sloppy, feeds too frequently, chooses too prominent a victim, makes someone powerful angry enough to override the practical considerations. Then the investigation happens. The evidence accumulates. The exposure occurs. And the Rakshasa dies or flees. Then another arrives, starts building their own power base, negotiates their own arrangements, and the cycle continues with different demon, same pattern. Because the structural incentives remain, the kingdom still needs economic management, still values stability, still implicitly accepts that some predation is tolerable cost of functioning society. This is why the Ramayana emphasizes destroying Lanka entirely, not reforming it, not managing it, destroying it. Rama understood that as long as the infrastructure existed, demons would keep using it. The only permanent solution was removal of the infrastructure itself, make the territory unusable, scatter the population, ensure that no demon could rebuild the power base that made predation easy. Extreme measure, probably excessive, definitely caused enormous suffering to humans who were just living in Lanka under Rakshasa rule. But from Rama's perspective, it was necessary. The alternative, leaving the infrastructure intact, meant the problem would recur. New demons would take Ravana's place, and the cycle would continue forever. Whether this justifies the destruction is debatable. What's not debatable is that Rama's solution worked. Lanka didn't become demon kingdom again. The infrastructure was gone, the enabling conditions removed, and future Rakshasas had to build power bases elsewhere, starting from scratch, without benefit of existing systems. The lesson applies beyond literal demons. Any predatory system, any power structure that enables exploitation, persists until its infrastructure is dismantled. Removing individuals doesn't solve problems when the roles they filled still exist. Someone else just fills them. Maybe better person, maybe worse. But the role continues. And roles shape behavior more than individuals' moral qualities. This is why the question, why do Rakshasas disguise themselves as nobles and crime lords, has structural answer rather than individual one. They don't do it because they're especially clever. They do it because society created roles that function identically to what demons do naturally. Accumulate resources, maintain authority, extract from populations, hide activities, avoid accountability. The disguise works because humans built the perfect disguise and called it legitimate authority. The Rakshasas just noticed and took advantage. They're not infiltrating an alien system. They're participating in one designed for their success. And every time society makes wealth more powerful, authority less accountable, and scrutiny more difficult, it makes their job easier. Want to stop Rakshasa infiltration? Stop creating conditions that make it effective. Flatten hierarchies. Distribute power. Require transparency. Make accumulation difficult. Celebrate cooperation over domination. Value maintenance over extraction. Measure success by what you give rather than what you take. Do all that, and Rakshasas lose their advantage. Because the roles they fill no longer exist. The disguises no longer work. The predation becomes visible, and society can address it directly rather than accommodating it indefinitely. But society probably won't do that, because humans who benefit from current systems, who occupy the same roles Rakshasas infiltrate, have no incentive to dismantle their own privileges, and the rest lack power to force changes. So the systems persist, the roles continue, and the Rakshasas keep infiltrating them successfully, generation after generation, because nothing fundamental changes. The Hindu texts that documented this pattern weren't offering solutions. They were documenting tragedy. The tragedy of recognizing a problem, but lacking will to fix it. The tragedy of understanding what needs to change, but choosing not to change it. The tragedy of building systems that enable predation and then acting surprised when predators use them. The Rakshasas disguising themselves as nobles and crime lords are consequences, not causes. The cause is how society organized itself, what it valued, what it protected, what it normalized. And until those underlying factors change, the disguises will keep working, the infiltration will continue, and checking hands will remain necessary but insufficient. Because even if the hands are human, even if no actual demons are present, the predatory dynamics remain. The extraction continues. The populations suffer. The authorities benefit. And calling it legitimate, because humans do it, rather than demons do it, is distinction without meaningful difference. The real horror of the Rakshasa infiltration isn't that demons hide among us. It's that they don't need to hide. They can operate openly, using mechanisms society provides, following rules society wrote, achieving outcomes society celebrates. And the only reason we call them monsters is that we know they're not human. Remove that knowledge, and they're just successful, wealthy, powerful, respected, everything society teaches us to admire and emulate. The Rakshasas succeeded by taking society's values seriously, by optimizing for them without pretending to value anything else. And their success reveals what those values actually prioritize underneath the rhetoric about justice and compassion and human dignity. They prioritize accumulation, authority, power, the ability to do what you want without consequences. Everything else is performance. And the Rakshasas, being demons, are honest about the performance. They know it's fake. They know what they're doing. They just don't care, because caring is weakness, and weakness is death. Human nobles who think differently end up poor or dead too, which means the ones who survive and thrive are functionally indistinguishable from demons in behavior, even if biologically human. Same predation, same extraction, same hiding behind authority. The Rakshasas are just better at it because they've had more practice and fewer moral qualms. So check the hands, but understand that what you're really checking for isn't demonic nature. It's willingness to prey on populations while maintaining veneer of legitimacy. And that quality exists independent of species. The backwards palms are just convenient marker for something that manifests with or without them. The Rakshasas taught us this lesson. Whether we're willing to learn, it determines whether the infiltration continues or whether something finally changes. But based on several millennia of human history since these stories were first told, I wouldn't bet on change. The system works too well for those it benefits. And those it benefits are, conveniently, the ones with power to change it, which is exactly how the Rakshasas planned it. So the next time you encounter wealth that seems too effortless, authority that deflects questions, or power that never quite shows its hands, remember what you've learned tonight. The disguise works not because Rakshasas are exceptional actors, but because we built a world where mediocre acting is sufficient, where asking to see someone's poems is considered ruder than letting them eat people in private. The Rakshasas targeting nobles and crime lords aren't infiltrating enemy territory. They're coming home, to systems designed for extraction, to hierarchies built for predation, to social structures that protect the powerful from consequences. They didn't create these conditions. They just optimized for them. And their success reveals what those conditions actually enable when someone takes them to their logical conclusion. Check the hands if you get the opportunity. But more importantly, ask why checking matters, why wealth purchases privacy, why authority avoids accountability, why we built systems that make hiding predation easier than exposing it, and whether discovering the predator is human rather than demonic actually changes anything meaningful about what they're doing. The backwards palms are just a marker, a convenient tell. But the predation they indicate exists independent of species. It's built into the roles, written into the systems, celebrated as success when done skillfully enough. The Rakshasas simply had the honesty to admit what they were doing and the competence to do it well. Rest tonight knowing that most authorities are probably human, that most wealthy people earn their status through means that don't involve literal shapeshifting, that the chances of your local noble being a demon are statistically quite low. But also rest knowing that statistical reassurance changes nothing about how those systems function, about who they benefit, about what they enable. The Rakshasas taught us that lesson by example. Whether we're willing to learn, it determines whether the infiltration continues or whether something finally changes. Though based on several thousand years of history since these stories were first told, the Rakshasas aren't worried. The systems that protect them keep getting stronger. The wealth that shields them keeps concentrating. And the questions that might expose them keep being considered too rude to ask in polite society. Sleep well. Lock your doors if it makes you feel better. And if tomorrow you meet someone powerful who won't shake your hand, who wears gloves in summer, who seems just slightly wrong in ways you can't articulate, trust that instinct. It might be paranoia. It might be pattern recognition. Either way, checking costs nothing. Just remember that even if the hands are normal, even if the palms face the right direction, that doesn't necessarily mean you found someone trustworthy. It just means you found someone human. And sometimes that distinction matters less than we'd like to believe. The Rakshasas know this. They've always known this. That's why they keep winning. Good night.